So, that video I posted a few weeks ago, how messed up was that, right? Alright, those of you who did see that video, I like you guys. You guys are cool. Those of you who didn't, you can check it out right about here in the annotation. And go watch it, because it sets up the mood for this video. Alright, with that shameless plug behind us, let's talk about Mother. Mother is a series that is very dear to me, even to the point that I have to say it's probably the best series I've ever played. Yeah, Legend of Zelda is my favorite series, but that really has more to do with how easy it is to jump into any given Zelda game, as well as my own personal history with it. But Mother is on a different level altogether. You see, I didn't get into the Mother series until about 4 years ago. In fact, it was 2014 when I finally beat Mother 3. You know what? I think I'm gonna need a minute. So, here's some happy music while Alright, I'm back. I'm good. We can continue the episode. Honestly, it's probably for the best that I didn't get into the series until I was older. As a kid, I doubt I would have appreciated the themes within this series and simply wouldn't have enjoyed it enough to revisit it later on in life. Instead, the Mother series, the first one which came out 14 days after I was born, completely passed me by, and I had no knowledge of them until I saw Ness in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Yeah, I know it was in Smash 1, but I didn't have an N64 as a kid because my parents were lame. So my first real experience with Smash Bros. Was Melee. At that point, though, I had no interest in the franchise whatsoever. Ness looked stupid. The four-side stage did nothing to interest me, and I knew nothing about the series. It wasn't until I started college that I started actually hearing people talk about the Mother series, from podcasts to MatPat's episode of Game Theory. Eventually, I was convinced to try out the series, and what I found was a masterpiece in every sense of the word. There is little to nothing I do not love about this series, but what has always stood out to me is the character of Giygas, or Gigu in the original translation. Now, to truly appreciate Giygas, you need a little background for his character. Giygas is an alien of an unknown species who is raised by a woman named Maria and her husband George, both of whom were abducted from Earth in 1909. The couple eventually came to adopt Giygas, and during this time, George studied the young alien and unlocked the power of PSI, and ultimately escaped from the aliens and returned to Earth, bringing the knowledge of PSI with him. It's unknown what happens to Maria during this time, but Giygas is brainwashed by his species and sent to stop the spread of PSI to Earth. As Giygas prepares for his journey to Earth, he discovers an object called the Apple of Enlightenment, which tells him that he will be defeated by a boy named Ness. So Giygas speeds up his plans and attacks Earth 20 years before he originally intended in order to keep that from happening. However, when Giygas reaches Earth, he finds that the power of PSI is already spread across the world, and there are a handful of people who are already showing aptitude for these abilities. One in particular, a young boy named Ninten, confronts Giygas and defeats him, forcing Giygas to retreat from the Earth. Eventually, Giygas would return to Earth, but this time he is discovered by a boy named Pokey, or Porky, Minch. Pokey becomes Giygas' right-hand man, but ends up using Giygas to his own ends, ultimately leading Giygas to defeat at the hands of Ness, as the Apple had predicted. And that's the end of Giygas' story. Pretty cut and dry, right? Have you seen this show? You know, it's never that simple with me. So let's talk about it, shall we? The final battle in Earthbound has always been something of a source of controversy within the community about what is actually going on. Many people say it's straightforward. An abortion. Or an allegory for abortion. And that thought on the surface makes sense. But it doesn't account for all the information. Yeah, you enter the battle walking along what appears to be internal organs, and the negative space does appear to be a baby in the fetal position. And the devil's machine does look like it may be a cervix if you squint your eyes and look at it at the right angle. But that's really all there is supporting that theory. It's all very surface observations, and I disagree. Nah, this battle is an allegory for something much more endemic in society. Yet it's one we turn a blind eye to far too often. The final battle of Earthbound is an allegory for rape, abuse, and the societal response to both. Now, Shigesato Itoi has been very open about what the inspiration for this battle was. When he was a kid, he walked into the wrong theater and was exposed to what he remembers as a rape scene in an adult film. It wasn't a rape scene, but nevertheless it traumatized him, and ultimately, what he went through inspired the end sequence of the game. But that's not quite enough to put a lid on this episode, because experiences can inspire a great many things without them becoming outright allegories. It's the foundation of all fiction. The inspiration could have been simply to make something truly terrifying for the final boss. And believe me, Giygas is terrifying. But regardless of that, we have to turn to the battle itself and look at what goes on during it. First, let's look at the path you follow to reach the battle. Listen to the music. It's very eerie and creepy, but every now and then you can hear it. Breathing. In fact, it sounds like two people breathing. One sounds somewhat pleasured, while the other sounds pained and restricted. It's a subtle touch, but it begins to set the atmosphere for what you're about to encounter. At the center of the devil's machine, Pokey appears and starts talking about how Giygas is not the master of pure evil, but has become evil itself. That's when you notice the second thing. The background takes the form of what appears to be an eye. An eye looking directly at Ness. After a while, though, Pokey begins to speak again and becomes much more verbally abusive towards Giygas, referring to him as an idiot, revealing that Giygas is not in control of himself, and that he doesn't even know what he's doing. It's obvious that Pokey has been in control of Giygas for a while now, using the devil's machine. The battle goes on, and as Paula prays for help, Giygas begins to speak. He calls out for Ness, for help, but Ness and his friends turn a blind eye to Giygas' pain, and instead continue to battle him and ignore Pokey. In the end, Ness and his friends defeat Giygas, and Pokey retreats, leading to the events of Mother 3. By now, it should be fairly clear what is going on and what roles everyone falls into within this allegory. Giygas represents the victim of rape and abuse, someone who is no longer in control of their actions for fear of what the abuser may do to them. Sometimes they do cry out for help, but all too often their cries are drowned out by a number of factors. Pokey is the abuser and the rapist. He is the prowler of the night, the abusive spouse, friend, or relative, the one who tears down, humiliates, and berates, and ultimately takes their pleasure at the expense of those they prey upon. As for Ness and his friends, well, they're us, society, the people from the outside looking in. The very people who far too often turn a blind eye to those who suffer by saying, oh, well, if she didn't want to be raped, she shouldn't have dressed like a hooker. Or, he got himself into this situation. He's been no saint. He didn't have to do the things he did. He could have just said no. Now, one might protest by saying, but Lucky Egg, Giygas was pure evil. He was trying to destroy the world. How can you act like he's the victim? And that's true. Giygas is an entity that was tasked with destroying the world and Mother, and wanted to absorb all of reality into eternal darkness in Earthbound. However, take a look at his life. He was experimented on and abandoned by his father, and brainwashed by his species. He was then sent to attack the Earth, and was defeated by a group of children who used the very lullaby his mom sang to him as a baby to defeat him. He then returns to Earth only to be found and taken over by Pokey, and then his pleas are completely ignored by Ness and his friends. His entire life was defined by abuse of the worst kinds. What little happiness he had was taken away early on in life, and he was only ever used as a weapon beyond that. No one ever gave him any slack, just throwing him from one abusive situation to the next. It resonates too accurately to our world today, as an estimated 75% of rape cases go unsolved. In 2008, nearly 90,000 women reported that they were raped, and it is estimated that another 75,000 went unreported. Only 22,000 ended in arrests. And these numbers don't even begin to truly show the gravity of the reality of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse in our world. These 90,000 reports only talk about actual rape towards women. This doesn't account for domestic abuse, abuse in the workplace, child abuse, child molestation, all the things that happen in our society every day to people of all genders, races, religions, everything. The full numbers are appalling. These numbers that I've listed are appalling. And the fact of the matter is that the majority of these cases go unreported or unsolved. So these appalling numbers are probably depressingly low. Between 2001 and 2012, 6,488 U.S. troops were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. The number of American women murdered by current or ex-male partners during that same time was 11,766. That is almost double the number of Americans who died in combat across 2 countries. Domestic violence against men isn't as common, but it's still common enough to be worrisome. But it is even more ignored than the cases of domestic violence against women. This is appalling, and the numbers only get worse as you count in all the other forms of abuse. Mother is the best series I have ever played because it's actually willing to tackle and shed light on issues like this. And they are the issues that don't need to stay in the dark. Maybe someday we'll see a world where the rates of abuse are much, much lower. They'll never go away completely because it's too much part of our nature. But that doesn't mean we just have to accept it as a fact of life. And if nothing else, a good start is simply to learn the signs and what to do if you discover someone you know is being abused, or worse. Knowing the facts, not turning a blind eye, and certainly not blaming the victims would begin to turn these cases around. As usual, I've got further information down in the description, and I'm going to have a few links to hotlines and various shelters, just in case any of you need it for whatever reason. And with that, I take my leave. I'll see you guys soon.